Warning. The following podcast contains politics, leftist politics, the whole truth, justice, American way thing. We live in a time where one has to post this. Progress is a dirty word, such as science and reason. My superheroes would weep. This podcast contains naughty language as well. Welcome everybody to DC Domingo. We've been away because, I'll explain in a second, but it's nice to be back. I'm going to start off with a shout out to comicbookdebate.com. It's a congregation of DC fans. Definitely go to their website, and they have a lot of great posts. A lot of the writers, you can find them on Twitter. They've been defending, DC movies for years now. Have a lot of credibility, go ahead and give them a like. And it's one of the coolest things that, someone that you've noticed kind of has gone up in notoriety. They were part of my Unite the Seven, as it were, about a year ago, or more than a year ago, actually. I found these few people on social media who were, kind of like, not blind sheep, but they were like, actual, fans of the DC universe, but they did, address, things and that were not cool with it, or things that they wished, or, any other stuff. So definitely go ahead and give them a like. So we have been away, simply because a lot of things have happened, I was working a lot towards my birthday, and I had a nice birthday weekend. I was going to do a podcast then, but I was just, there's a lot of cool stuff happening around my birthday, and I just enjoyed my birthday. So that was one podcast that I could have made. And then after my birthday, almost immediately, there was a California fire. And, it was one long week of almost evacuation. We were lucky enough to not get evacuated, but there were 3 fires near us that were pretty horrible, actually. I'm sharing some of my own pictures that I took, just because, it's, I don't know, we kind of look up to all these heroes and stuff, and, with these, gigantic fires, like the cops, the fighters, the army, the medics, everybody just kind of stepped up to the plate here in California. And even like average citizens, some of them were putting out fires of houses that I didn't know, who lived there. They were just doing the Good Samaritan things. A lot of beautiful stories out here in California from that. So that lasted for about a week. After that, we had horrible smoke everywhere. So, you can't really do a podcast when you can't really breathe. It was a national crisis, or California crisis. I went out to take a couple pictures. I had a scarf at first, and then I had a mask that would block out some of the particles, and we kept the windows closed, and the AC circulating, but it was still kind of hard to breathe, so that was another third week of podcasts that I couldn't do that. I don't know if it was as a side effect or response to, but my body got sick, started coughing, and all the good stuff. I don't know if it was a cold or a flu, but whatever it was a nasty bug, and that was a fourth week. And lately I just have a dry cough that is finally dissipating and going away. And this last week we had some really cool stuff going on with the Xbox, so I was investing my time doing all those things in the past few weeks. So while I love DC, life happens. But anyways, that's where we've been, and I'm gonna tackle things that we were doing, while we were away, but quite actively on social media. One of the very early things that happened that I was kind of, it's a hard thing to go through when you have 3 wildfires approaching your living quarters, and you're tweeting to your loved ones, to your family, to everybody concerned around the neighborhood, and then you have some trolls on Twitter just trashing DC. I mean, that's kind of like a kind of loyalty that not many brands, deserve. But anyways, there was a lot of people, including some fans and some fans groups. Somehow, there was the news that a portion of the classic Superman theme was going to be played in the Justice League. And, a few things happened. Some people used this to their own, bias, I guess. And I actually had this very interesting exchange on a classic Superman page by Steve Unis. He's a great guy, but someone over here had a triggered response, saying that somehow this relates to illegal immigrants killing more citizens of the U.S. and cited some quite horrible Nazi website. And when I called him out on it, yeah, he removed it, but he didn't apologize at all. And a lot of the responses from people who like nostalgia, who like the older Superman, also liked an older time in the U.S. when there wasn't a lot of equality for people. And it's kind of a weird thing that they have made Superman into a kind of a neutered, Boy Scout who obeys authority, which is not what the original intent of the character was. So it was kind of weird seeing a lot of these, pro-Trump, pro-America, embrace, this kind of version of the character without having any context or knowledge of, why that character became what it was after the 1950s congressional hearings on the Red Scare, and also on the effect of comic books on the youth, that had some criminal aspects to it. They basically blame comic books for the criminality of, teenage rebellion, in the 50s. So, anyways, a lot of people don't know much about that and how the censorship played a role in that. They just assume that, Superman is bland patriotism, and that's kind of defeats the character and is quite dangerous. So it was kind of weird having that conversation, and, some people are professional trolls, and they have, acquired a taste of film critics online, but they're just professional trolls. I don't know if you've seen my Twitter, but I don't spend time talking crap about things I don't like. But that's not the case with these online, trolls, as you can see over here. This person on Twitter, Lights Camera Podcast, I guess, you know, share the same thing. It's like trying to bait DC people into arguing by, poking fun of us. And, I loved how my response of like, you know, I demand like an answer, but then, these white supremacists and fascists always like demand that you answer them first, and they just keep questioning whatever you're typing. It's a very like, fascist technique. I've seen it in a lot of groups. They really don't care what you have to say. All these white supremacists and fascists just keep hammering you with questions and questions and questions and questions and questions without giving a fuck about like actually answering you. And I was just talking to my other fellow intellectuals, and it's the same technique used in comic books, like debates, console debates for video games, and even political debates. It's kind of funny, but people tend to argue the same way no matter what the topic or spectrum is. And once you figure out what their thinking logic is, it's really easy to just decompress or, deconfigure their logic and not have it worked against you, which is why a lot of people just don't argue with me. Anyways, I had the same exchange with someone who it's kind of hard for me to do their job. They couldn't understand that, variety is good for not only the species, but also for the medium in general. Cinematic banter just couldn't not understand that Warner Brothers wanted to, make diverse films and make changes just for the medium itself, and they were stuck in the situation where they thought that, corporations only need to make money and that's the only goal. It's like, well, that sounds very Trump-like, but no. Some people want to nurture and see things as art. Martin Scorsese, one of the, the best directors, is working with Warner Brothers to make, movies. He wants to make, an Elseworlds Joker movie, which is pretty damn awesome. Martin Scorsese obviously is very famous for saying, don't mess with genre. And he's right, For instance, we saw a lot of people just disregard comic books as, oh, that shit sucks. It's just supposed to be silly and funny. Whereas in France, a movie based on comic books has actually won their version of the Oscar, for best film, the Palme d'Or. So, yeah, while we were, fearing our lives for, encroached by fire, we were still, holding that, DC Comics, banner. And it's kind of a nice privilege because we have people like these, Jeff Snyder, who is, who I don't know, a lot of people have called him out on this, and they're just stuck on their views of like, I hate these movies by this one company, but not by Disney or Marvel. So, and you have their fellow friends, their hipster friends in LA who just kind of, like things if they're popular, not because they have the balls to like anything outside of their comfort zone. And lately there was yesterday and today there was a lot of argument between even among those hipsters, because apparently Justice League is getting good reviews and they couldn't handle it. So even amongst themselves, they're kind of like devouring their own. And it's been kind of hilarious just to watch, people freak out about a movie they didn't seem to give a fuck to begin with. Anyways, so that's what we were doing while all these fires were going on. Alrighty, so the embargo has been lifted partially to some critics, and the reviews are mid to high, in the positive, which is, pretty interesting. A lot of people have gone to, Rotten Tomatoes because that's all they know. That's what sells in the clicks, and Rotten Tomatoes, lists their thing as Justice League buzz. It's not perfect, but it's fun and entertaining. And it's funny that they list perfect as the first thing, because it's almost like that's what they were expecting, a DC movie. Meanwhile, Thor Ragnarok doesn't has to be perfect. It doesn't even has to be a Thor movie. It has to become a parody of itself. I made this really funny meme comparing it to, Austin Powers following two very serious James Bond movies. I mean, yeah, it's completely out of character, completely out of synchronicity with the comic books. But, apparently, Thor Ragnarok is 93% fresh, while Saving Private Ryan is a 92. Happy Veterans Day from fucking Rotten Tomatoes. So fuck them. So yeah, I'm not gonna really validate that piece of shit website. I'm sorry that I'm swearing, but I did have a little disclaimer in the intro. So yeah, I don't really, care to see what the reviews are, even if they are mid to high in the positive. I mean, I guess it's good for little kids out there, so they don't have to like fucking, argue with like assholes online. And I think that's what it comes down to in our modern society. I don't think it's so much that a lot of bloggers and fans, or pseudo fans actually, care about these movies. They just don't want to get into arguments with people. They just want to fucking enjoy it and be part of something that everybody else likes. For instance, Stranger Things, I didn't like the first two episodes because they were relying too much on nostalgia and E.T., but when they started doing their own thing, I was like, okay, this is going to be good, all right? And, that was not a stand that was very well received by some of my peers, and I was like, hey, you got to be discerning on this. So while I'm really happy that it's going to get good reviews by other people, people have to understand like what the context is, like Will Smith says, if you were not there in my struggle, don't be there in my success. I don't give a fuck about reviewers anymore, because they're not really reviewing the film itself. They're not going to tell me about composition. They're going to tell me about how quick the shots were. I happen to think that there is some bias going on in journalism, and it wasn't until recently that I learned that Zack Snyder was working on a Ayn Rand movie. I think another version of The Fountainhead or something like that. And it's not like I'm jumping to conclusions and saying that Zack Snyder is like a libertarian, but it would make sense why he would be ostracized by Hollywood if he was. I mean, the other, movie director who has been ostracized is a Republican, Michael Bay. But then again, The Rock is also Republican, and he's not ostracized as much. Maybe because, Hollywood wouldn't look good, because, he's half Hawaiian, half black. So they might be scared of the press, of being anti, person of color. But it is interesting that, there are lesser directors out there who still make movies and they don't get the same amount of shit that, Bay or Snyder do. I mean, we have, a few confirmed pedophiles out there who are still making movies and they don't get the scrutiny, that these two have. So yeah, I am very wary of the media. And Ray Fisher, who plays Cyborg, he said that when he learned about why Zack had to leave, because of a family tragedy, he stayed away from Twitter because he knew that people were going to capitalize on it and just hate Zack. For whatever reason, he's been ostracized when other directors haven't, and it's just kind of unfortunate. So even if the critics come around and they praise another DC movie, I'm not gonna give a shit about them. I would like the critics if they actually took time to read the books. You can't take a movie seriously, or movie critics seriously, if for instance, if they're reviewing Crime and Punishment, or like Gone with the Wind, and they don't compare it to the book. You wouldn't take them into a seriousness. And same thing, I haven't seen many film critics, whether they trash Marvel or they praise Marvel, they haven't mentioned jack shit about Marvel's Ultimate Universe, which is a separate, kind of like a separate universe. It started in the early 2000s to kind of respond to DC Comics' The Authority, published through a subprint. So I haven't seen many people cite the comic books while reviewing comic book Marvel movies, even though they're like in their 15 or 17 movie now. So yeah, even while reviewing movies based on comic books, all these critics don't said comic books. That's why you got Age of Ultron and Civil War, and many critics didn't know that was actually based on comic books titled Age of Ultron and Civil War, which is kind of unfortunate because you want to hold people to their high standards. I mean, imagine if somebody reviewed the movie 42 by Jackie Robinson, about Jackie Robinson, the first African American to play ball, and be like, I don't know anything about black people, I don't know anything about baseball. Like, you would get fired from your job. So while we're not comparing fiction to reality, we are comparing accountability. That's what we are doing. So a lot of critics are lazy, and they do like Yelp way. They don't really compare to film cuisine critics from France. They just tell you how they feel about certain things, and that's kind of unfortunate. So that's why we're not really embracing USA film critics, because they're kind of a joke. They're going for sensationalism, and that has to do with the decline of journalism in the States. If you go to any other country, newspapers are still sold, and your mom and pop store can still run ads there for relatively cheap. You can get coupons. There's no Craigslist in a lot of countries, so they list those kind of things in the newspaper. If you go to IGN, that is based on San Francisco, you will never see an ad for Tommy's Joint, which is a very famous, San Francisco restaurant there. You'll never see the ad there, even though they're based in San Francisco. Why? Because there's no revenue. There's no incentive to be in touch with reality, even of your surrounding areas and media. Media right now, it's click-based, If somebody goes to your website, you get a percentage based on how many clicks you have, and that's how much advertisers are willing to spend money on you. And that's why even journalism in the States has gone down, because it's mostly advertising. It used to be advertising driven, but now it's click based. So they do a lot of clickbait. That's why Rotten Tomatoes does this kind of crap, and all the other film critics have to do those catchy things. So anyways, while it is good news that it is getting a positive vibe, hey, we have to kind of be diligent and just kind of like make up our mind. I think that Chris Terrio said a long time ago that this was going to be a little bit lighter because there's a story arc, kind of like imagine Man of Steel being like A New Hope. Batman vs. Superman was The Empire Strikes Back, very dark. And then this might be like, Return of the Jedi, a little bit lighter, but it does kind of coincide with Justice League, the comic book coming out in the 60s, whereas Man of Steel kind of paid homage to, the original Superman in Action Comics as a, kind of like just very bravado, sci-fi. There were no superheroes at that time, so it makes sense that Man of Steel was more of a sci-fi movie than a superhero movie. And Batman vs. Superman was basically paying homage to the Trinity of these characters that were born between World War One and World War Two. So it makes sense that it was darker. By the time the Justice League comic came around, it was the 60s, baby boomers, tonality completely different than, the Trinity back in their heyday. So yeah, which kind of brings me to a plug. I'm going to plug in my, podcast called the DC Extended Universe So Far. So yeah, go ahead and check that out. I do kind of an analysis of it. All right, next subject is Danny Elfman scoring Justice League. Recently, a YouTuber put the entire soundtrack up for free, and it has a description of every title. I didn't look at the title lists, but because there might be spoilers. I recall The Phantom Menace. They had the soundtrack by John Williams, and it had like such and such funeral, and I was like, oh man, come on, don't title the songs with the spoilers like that. So I've learned my lesson to never listen to the soundtracks and have the movie spoiled for you. But I guess one of the things that it's happening is that we've grown used to Hans Zimmer, and then in Batman vs. Superman, Junkie XL, just kind of like having this bombastic, reign. And also, people tend to forget that Suicide Squad was not scored by Zimmer, so, we've been kind of spoiled and enjoyed Zimmer scoring. And this was going to be like a solo Junkie XL soundtrack. And, maybe some people decided to go against that. Junkie XL did an amazing work on Mad Max. I mean, that movie is a kind of a masterpiece from head to toe, even the score. And sometimes musicians are just, very set in their ways. You can't ask, a 9 Inch Nails, Trent Reznor, and, his collaborators to make a John Williams score. You can, but that's kind of doing a disservice, to Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, who have a certain set of, techniques. Same thing with Junkie XL. He's got his own thing going, and maybe the Justice League wasn't tonally, his. And I know there's actually other films down the road, so while many fans felt like it was a disservice to Junkie XL, to kind of be replaced by Danny Elfman, there are other projects that he might be asked to participate with the, DC films. So while I listened to this soundtrack, I only listened to it once and with several interruptions. So I don't have, it hasn't blown me away, but it hasn't disappointed me yet. What I did notice is that he did use the Batman theme from, Tim Burton's 89 Batman, which I grew up with, and also used the John Williams Superman, theme from the 70s movie. And, you might go like, hey, what the hell, wasn't there like a Superman theme from Batman vs. Superman? And there was A Beautiful Lie, and there, if you read through the soundtrack, even on Man of Steel, there is no title entitled, Superman's theme or Batman's theme. we have the Superman soundtrack that comes on in Man of Steel with the nice drums, dun 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 dun, and also when Batman shows up, in Batman vs Superman, there's a dun 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 dun. So we have these two pieces that we associated with those characters because that's what they play when they come on. But it's not a Superman theme; it's a Man of Steel theme. So while we are tripping about it online, it doesn't make sense that while we have a much darker Batman and Batman vs Superman, kind of like Frank Miller's Dark Knight, that's evolving into the Batman everybody knows. Same thing with Man of Steel. We have the Man of Steel, bombastic origin soundtrack, and that will be evolving into the John Williams score. So I still say that a score needs context. And right now the context that we have is Danny Elfman replacing Hans Zimmer. That's probably not the best context that we need. So the real context would be, with the film itself. So yeah, I will wait until this film kind of rolls around, and I do plan to enjoy it, blasting it on my speakers, because that's the way to do it. So I'm going to hold off judgment on the score.